Hello?
Of all the characters in FNAF to deserve extreme consideration and care in being brought to life through voice acting, none, I think, rise above the importance of Elizabeth Afton. Not only was she the first child to have fully voiced dialogue in a FNAF game, but she's also one of the first voices heard in Sister Location, a game which marked a significant turning point in the franchise. One way to accomplish this was by introducing voice acting to the mainline games, beyond Phone Guy. After the opening cutscene established that voice acting can have a presence in FNAF games now, players clicked on the New Game button and were immediately notified, in the form of a small British voice echoing from the abyss, that voice acting in FNAF would not just be a gimmick reserved for downtime like in cutscenes, but would now become a core component of these games. There's also the fact that she's, well, an Afton. Point is, Elizabeth's voice is a very important aspect of her, and she is far more complex than people give her credit for, owed largely in part to the brilliant performance provided by Sarah Jane Narqui in each of the games, the one game she appears in.
Someone is inside.
Annoying.
Someone is inside.
I truly believe Narqui's voice acting to be some of the best this series has to offer, especially with Elizabeth, due to the unique nature of her voice lines. Elizabeth is never on screen when she talks. Pretty standard for Click Team FNAF, but neither is the rest of the scene in which her dialogue takes place. Michael's voice line in Sister Location's Custom Night was a soliloquy. It was allowed to exist in an ambiguous void. He was basically talking to himself. It wasn't necessarily the context of that scene that was important, but the content, which we understood through not just his words, but also the emotive music as well as the on-screen visuals. William's voice line in Sister Location's opening was part of a conversation, the subject of which was visible on screen the whole time, and whose other party could also be heard talking.
Those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
Elizabeth's dialogue is visually paired with nothing, literal darkness, and audibly paired with...
Daddy, you let the other children go see her. Why won't you let me go?
Also nothing. No music, and no other voices to establish a back and forth conversation. The only context you receive to her voice lines is provided elsewhere in the game, through other recountings of the same scene, neither of which are 100% truthful to reality. Despite this, there is never any confusion as to what is going on in Elizabeth's voice lines because, just through her voice alone, Narqui is able to thoroughly flesh out the scene. And not only that, but she provides deep insight into the tragic character of Elizabeth Afton in each of her voice lines, which I will attempt to decode to the best of my ability. As always, please be mindful of the cringe you will be exposed to from here on out, and try to have fun with my ideas, even if you don't agree with them. First of all, there are really two voices through which Elizabeth Afton's character is expressed, through her own direct voice lines, and through those of Circus Baby, the animatronic she goes on to possess after her death, voiced by Heather Masters. To preface, I will not be covering Baby's lines in every title she makes a voiced appearance in, only the ones which also reference Elizabeth, for the sake of keeping this video thematically on track. But also, I'm sorry, but I am not going to jump from an analysis of a 1-minute monologue to 3 minutes of dialogue to 20 minutes of dialogue? What are you, crazy?
Are you crazy?
Anyway, there is significant ambiguity over where Elizabeth Afton ends and where Circus Baby begins, which means at times it can be tough to determine how much influence Elizabeth has over Baby's behavior, as well as her voice. Perhaps the most obvious discrepancy between them is their differing accents, which can really just be explained by the fact that Baby is an animatronic with her own American accented voice box, so this is how she and any spirit possessing her would sound.
America!
In any case, the more important comparison to make is the general cadence of Elizabeth and Baby. The similarities between the voice acting behind the two and similar patterns in their speech would imply a shared personality, which I'd consider far more damning evidence for them being the same person than a shared dialect. Heather Masters shared that the first rendition of Baby's voice in FNAF World was directed to be very robotic.
The show will begin momentarily. Everyone, please stay in your seats.
But when it came time to record lines for Sister Location, the direction she was given was to be more human, and the voice was workshopped to a point where the robotic element was all but gone.
If you go back and listen, the original Baby was very robotic, and that was originally what he wanted. And when he came back with the game, he changed things up. And so he's like, no, let's try this again. I really want her to be a lot more human sounding. And so finally, we got it to where the robotic factor just kind of...
In the final game, Baby is largely soft-spoken and reserved.
I can't be fixed.
In my opinion, her voice is the embodiment of trauma. She sounds apprehensive every time she speaks, like she's been taught her whole life to keep her mouth shut.
I recommend that you hurry, though.
It takes her a while to speak up in Sister Location. Even after Hand Unit deactivates and it's safe for her to communicate with the player, she still waits a long time, sitting in prolonged silence before it seems she works up the confidence to say anything. And when she does, she has a very peculiar rhythm to her speech, pausing at odd moments and speaking in a rather forthright tone, as if she's not used to talking.
I don't recognize you. You are new.
According to Heather Masters, Baby's voice was heavily influenced by Tammy Stronach's performance as the childlike Empress in The Never-Ending Story.
Why do you look so sad?
While I was recording her, I would say that my biggest inspiration that I drew from was the Empress from The Never-Ending Story. And the Empress is this child, and, at the end, she's like, that's all that's left of Fantasia. And, she's very, tortured, and the way that she speaks is kind of, peculiar.
Masters' impression of this character is much the same as her impression of Baby, in that she believes them to both be tortured, with not even a hint of malice, which I think comes largely from the direction provided by Scott Cawthon. The casting call for Baby acknowledged her role as a killer, but also clarified that she is misunderstood, something Masters kind of took to heart.
At the end of Sister Location, I still thought, she's just misunderstood, she's just tortured. I believe the best about people, and I love her.
Scott wanted Baby to sound cold and emotionless, but also affectionate, so that the player would be inclined to trust her, but still feel intimidated by her. The final note Scott makes is that she should sound innocent with a hint of sorrow. Baby is an innately traumatized and damaged character, regardless of the actions she would go on to take, and I don't think that aspect of her is artificial or just a method of manipulation. I feel it's worth bringing up here the insight that Heather Masters had regarding her character's motivation and how that played a part in her performance, or rather how it infamously didn't. As revealed in her interview with Dorco, Masters apparently had no idea what Baby's true, sinister purpose was, until Dorco himself told her, long after she had recorded lines for Baby up to FNAF 6.
I was just talking with a UK YouTuber yesterday, and he was telling me about my character and that my character's bad. And I was like, I didn't know that. And it broke my heart.
Baby knows what she wants. She's here to kill kids. And,
What?
Did you not know that?
What?
I don't think Scott's aversion to letting Masters know this information is indicative of Baby herself not knowing her true nature. Instead, I think it was so that the fact that Baby is lying didn't show in her performance, and she sounded completely sincere, even when she wasn't, to really sell her ability to pretend. Also, I lied. This wasn't the final note on the casting call for Baby. This was. Now, this sounds awkward for a character with such heavy child theming, but I think I get what Scott was going for. It's a way of manifesting Baby's manipulative nature, particularly over the player, into an audible format. Through adding a layer of seduction onto her voice, Baby becomes simultaneously more enticing and uncomfortable to listen to, similar to William Afton's voice from the opening, in that it's overly gentle.
I can do something special. Did you know that?
She can even dispense ice cream.
Baby tells us in her Night 4 monologue that she's learned how important it is to pretend to be someone else, which implies that deception has become sort of a survival tactic for her. It's how she gets by in this place. Baby is duplicitous and manipulative because she has to be, not because she enjoys toying with you.
I love her so much, and in my mind, I don't know, she's tortured and sweet and sad, and anything she does is only because of her hard life. So when you say she's evil, I'm like,
And now I'm going to break down some of her voice lines in Sister Location and see how effectively they characterize Baby in this way. Starting with this.
I don't recognize you. You are new.
This is our first hint at Baby's hyper-awareness of her surroundings, which she divulges more into in Night 3. And being the first thing we hear from her, it's not a very reassuring introduction, especially after her unresponsiveness the previous night, and after we electrocuted her several times in a row, and after the power to the building was shut down, leaving us completely vulnerable. Her first words are not only unsympathetic, they are cold and clinical, serving as a reminder of the total isolation from humanity one is subject to down in this bunker that Baby basically lives in. She's a robot. She can't care for your well-being. And as she goes on, this idea is only further hammered in, as she muses on everything but the danger of the player's current situation.
I remember this scenario, however.
This is where the peculiar rhythm to Baby's speech first becomes noticeable, going beyond her simply being a monotone robot. In fact, despite her words themselves being rather cold and unfeeling, her voice is surprisingly human, emotive. It begins soft and non-threatening.
I remember this
But a sort of edge begins to emerge when she utters the word scenario.
scenario.
It's spoken through a shudder of sorts. It also takes her a moment to recuperate, as she takes a beat before saying the last word, and then again before continuing the rest of her speech.
I remember this scenario, however. It's a strange thing to want to do.
The last time this scenario happened, it doesn't seem to have left a very positive impact on Baby. Her musings also reveal the sheer disdain she has for this place, as her voice deepens and regains that edge whenever she references it.
To come here, in a place like this, willingly.
This is not only her demonstrating her contempt for the underground facility, but it's also a slight towards the player for coming here in the first place.
Maybe curiosity, maybe ignorance.
This aligns with her more sarcastic demeanor that fully emerges later on in the game.
Dummy.
It's just a little subdued at this point. It's as though she's saying, you wanted to come to this terrible place. You chose to come here. Some of us didn't have that same freedom. So, with her initial spiel out of the way, your first thought as the player would probably be, oh, she doesn't really like me, does she? Except the immediate next words to come out of her voice box are ones of aid,
Maybe
concern,
ignorance.
comfort.
There is a space under the desk. Someone before you crafted it into a hiding place, and it worked for him.
Mixed signals, whiplash. That's the expected reaction from this, especially as Baby's voice becomes genuinely urgent and higher pitched, contrasting her deep, foreboding voice just moments prior. It should be noted, however, that this is very indirect help. She's simply pointing something out to you, not giving you specific directions or telling you what to do, or even telling you what danger you're in. She's helping, yes, but she's still leaving you largely in the dark. You can even hear sounds of creaking and banging, indicating that something is getting closer as Baby talks, which she doesn't address.
There is a space under the desk. Someone before you crafted it into a hiding place, and it worked for him. I recommend that you hurry, though.
Baby is kind enough to want to help you, but she also wants you to feel unease, to assert herself as the one in control, and you as helpless to do anything but follow her instructions. After all, here you are, a stranger from the outside, coming into this prison and flaunting your freedom to the prisoners. Baby probably needed this sense of control after everything she's been through. But even still, she maintains an apprehensive tone, barking orders while simultaneously shrinking into herself.
I recommend that you hurry, though.
The final part of this monologue before we're forced to deal with the biddy-babs is the tonal reverse of the first part. Suddenly, Baby is incredibly sympathetic to our situation, reassuring our safety,
You will be safe there.
telling us directly what to do,
Just try not to make eye contact.
and generally trying to put us at ease.
It will be over soon. they will lose interest.
This is yet another abrupt shift in her attitude towards the player. She's kind of all over the place in this regard, which is seen throughout the game, not just in this one voice line, and further demonstrates how she does not want you to feel in control here, helping you out just enough so that you can trust her, but not enough that you can allow yourself to feel comfortable while you're here. She didn't tell you what will be over soon, or who will lose interest.
They will lose interest.
Who? Who are we talking about?
She omits that information and lets you worry about it while she speaks under the guise of comfort, as her tone becomes slightly more gentle.
Maybe ignorance. It will be over soon. They will lose interest.
That last bit, referring to the Biddy Babs, however, is delivered in a similar way as her lines talking about the bunker, with underlying disdain. Despite being presented to us as her goons, the Biddy Babs and Baby don't actually seem to get along that well.
She's watching us. We have to leave now.
This delivery also implies that she's used to this behavior from the Biddy Babs, or rather, too used to it.
They will lose interest.
Suffice to say, Baby is fed up with life underground, and the annoying little critters she has to share a home with.
When your guide comes back online, he is going to tell you that he was unsuccessful, that you must restart the system manually.
Back to that cold, unfeeling demeanor, Baby's first words once the Biddy Babs leave cut straight to the chase, and skip over what would be a more human exchange like, "Are you okay?" or "Don't worry, it's safe now." This second monologue as a whole is pretty curt, which is probably because this is her last chance to give you vital information before Hand Unit returns, and she deems it best to not waste the time she has left to talk. Even under the assumption that this will be the last you hear from her for a while, she makes the choice to only say what is necessary and nothing else.
When you hear her music become louder, she is growing near, listening for you. Wait, and be still.
She's not here to be your friend. Also, linking back to the topic of Baby not liking the company she has in this bunker, the snark in her voice when she references Hand Unit isn't lost on me. She does not like that guy.
When your guide comes back online,
This is her reinforcing her position as your guide, and diminishing Hand Unit's worth as a guide. Don't trust him, trust me. Additionally, Hand Unit is basically the warden of this prison, and encourages the technicians to torment the animatronics further by shocking them, so it's no wonder that Baby doesn't care too much for him. Night 3's monologue is where we get to the real meat and potatoes of Baby's voice lines, as we hear about her perspective of an incident where she violently and involuntarily abducts a child, and the impact it left on her emotionally, as well as spiritually. That child's name? Elizabeth Afton. Yeah, remember her? She's in the title. Baby obviously knows who Elizabeth is, or at least her relation to William Afton, made evident by how she, in the form of Enid, uses Elizabeth's voice to emotionally manipulate and guilt-trip the player who she thinks is William Afton.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with me again.
This means that her recounting of this incident in her monologue intentionally omits pertinent details, like the fact that she knows the identity of this little girl.
a little girl, standing by herself.
She would not do this, and then go on to ask questions that she obviously already knows the answer to, unless she was trying to get a specific reaction out of the listener.
Did you know that I was on stage once? I can do something special. Did you know that? I would always count the children. I'm not sure why.
She knows why. She is essentially playing dumb here, acting clueless so that Afton will reflect on his misdeeds by filling in the gaps himself. Of course, the player character is not William Afton, the Fun Times just think it is. It's implied that Baby didn't initially think this when she first spoke to the player in Night 2,
I don't recognize you.
but she definitely started to suspect something between then and this monologue. While this monologue does largely seem to be for the sake of calling out Afton, I also think that the thoughts Baby expresses here are not entirely disingenuous. After all, this interaction with her is entirely optional. It's not mandatory for the progression of the story, or by extension, Baby's character journey, which means she doesn't really have to say any of this. She's saying it simply because she wants to.
Did you know that I was on stage once? It wasn't for very long, only one day. What a wonderful day, though.
Baby's voice is very wistful here. The one day where she got to perform on stage is something she looks back on fondly and yearns to go back to. I believe this is one of the things she isn't being facetious about.
Music was always coming from somewhere else. Down a hall.
Quite a few parts of this monologue make Baby sound especially childish. I've always read this line as Baby misunderstanding the facade of animatronic performances, being confused as to why the music isn't coming straight from her, even though she's supposed to be the one singing.
I smelled like birthday cake.
I could maybe buy into the idea that the glam rock animatronics can recognize smells.
Something smells good.
But the more primitive models of the fun times, for whom such a feature serves no aid to their core function,
seems rather dubious.
Daru, what the f*** are you doing here?
What I believe this demonstrates is a merging of the thoughts and memories of Circus Baby and Elizabeth Afton. This could explain some of the oddities in her dialogue, like how some things perplex and fascinate her when they really shouldn't.
I can do something special. Did you know that? I can make ice cream.
Baby's voice becomes quieter and almost smug upon asking, "Did you know that?"
Did you know that?
Before abruptly increasing in volume and energy when she clarifies what she meant, with a clear smile in her voice.
I can make ice cream.
She was 100% toying with the player. I'm sure at this point, especially after the exchange from the opening cutscene, where some mysterious, sinister feature of hers is alluded to, you would probably expect Baby to be referring to something other than the ice cream. These constant rhetorical questions directed to the player prove that Baby is trying to get under Afton's skin with feigned naivety.
I couldn't move. At least, not until she stepped closer.
Baby slips in and out of expressive and emotionally detached during her narration of this anecdote. At times, it's as if she's reciting a transcript of events, and at others, it's like she's actively reliving the moments she describes. Her delivery of "I couldn't move" being highlighted with distress and fear, before immediately returning to detached and lethargic.
I couldn't move. At least, not until she stepped closer.
A similar delivery can be heard in "But they couldn't hear her," which emanates pity and empathy,
But they couldn't hear her over the sounds of their own excitement.
seeming to further suggest Elizabeth's memory and feelings towards these events influencing Baby's.
There was screaming for a moment, but only for a moment.
It's worth noting how Baby begins using rather vague terms when she talks about what happened to Elizabeth. There are clearly details missing from this part of the story. Perhaps it's a touchy subject for her. Baby's language is an attempt to diminish the harm she caused, her tone coming across as dismissive in an almost remorseful way, as if to say, "I don't like talking about this." This can lead to her being seen as more sympathetic by painting her as someone that dislikes being responsible for so much pain, but it simultaneously dehumanizes her through her trivializing this pain and making it out to be not that big a deal. This interpretation is supported by the childish, "but I didn't mean to" inflection in her voice.
But only for a moment. I still hear her sometimes.
This entire monologue is underscored with a theme of trauma, but I feel that its presence is felt most in this line. Baby killed Elizabeth by pulling the child into the cavity of her stomach. Elizabeth is literally in Baby, and FNAF has already well established the idea of children possessing robots at this point. So, through dramatic irony, the player knows that this line is not a typical reflection of trauma, and instead insinuates that the memory of Elizabeth is remaining with Baby in a far more literal way.
Why did that happen?
As I've gone over, Baby already understands the purpose she was built for. She knows technically why this happened, but her high-pitched tone is congruent with desperation and pleading as opposed to straight-up confusion, hinting at her true underlying question, which is not "why did that happen?" but "why did that have to happen?" Baby doesn't like that she was made to kill. She liked performing, and the thought of her true sinister function makes her flustered and panicked.
I couldn't move.
She doesn't want to be this way. On night 4, Baby's cadence is drastically different from what was heard in her previous monologues. Now her words seem to carry venom and spite, albeit on a level that is clearly withheld and not full-on explosive. Her voice is essentially that of a proto-Scrap Baby here.
Did I catch you off guard? I have you hidden too well.
When asked about this sudden difference in performance, Heather Masters posited that Baby's more lively, aggressive intonation could derive from her growing determination and desperation, as well as signifying her becoming more purposeful. This checks out, I think, as Baby almost certainly has the protagonist pinned as William Afton at this point, giving her a motivation to act more antagonistic towards us. And her tone throughout her Night 4 dialogue is very calculated, and delicate even. Baby is dedicated to making Afton struggle, squirm. She relishes in his suffering. The opening part of this monologue is delivered through a sinister whisper, with a wide grin, indicating both pride and smugness. She doesn't even try to hide this, describing the danger that the player is in with a voice that implies that they're actually good things.
The cameras were searching for you, but they couldn't find you.
She's basically taking this time to pat herself on the back on how well she has you cornered.
I have you hidden too well.
Which culminates in the thesis statement of this monologue.
I kidnapped you.
What makes the whisper threatening is a juxtaposition in tone. Typically, a whisper is a tool to soothe and lull. In a panic-inducing, potentially life-threatening situation, such as waking up constrained in pitch darkness, a soft voice urging you not to panic should bring solace and reassurance. But when the things this voice is saying is not of a reassuring nature, it generates in the listener a sense of doom and futility, inviting you to accept your fate. This is the behavior of a predator toying with its prey, made clear by this hiss-like whisper being a constant factor throughout Baby's dialogue on this night. She never spoke like this before, but now that she has you trapped, hidden, helpless, she softly hisses each of her words and maintains a barely disguised smile, deeply proud of her catch.
I kidnapped you.
Baby's smug tone makes the underlying vitriol in her voice seem very much personal, the product of a long-held, or at the very least, an intensely passionate, grudge. Each of her sentences sounds like the sarcastic, contemptuous answer to an unheard question, like it's something she's been wanting to get off her chest for a while now.
I don't think it was ever used. At least not the way it was meant to be used.
Or like there's some joke embedded in her words that she expects you to be in on.
Try not to wiggle, though. I'm not going to hurt you.
Within Baby's rumination, particularly in regards to the scooper, you can almost hear an emerging sentimentality as her voice loses its venom, becoming more sincere and also shrinking in volume, as though she's beginning to feel remorseful.
Thankfully, I don't think a freshly opened pint of ice cream feels anything at all.
There's something wistful in her delivery here, bordering on compassionate. She wishes she was fortunate enough to lack the ability to feel pain or fear.
Do you ever play make-believe? Pretend to be one way when you are really the other? It's very important.
The importance Baby places on playing make-believe comes across as incredibly childish, but it is delivered with a contrasting severity, illustrating that Baby and the soul inhabiting her are still only infants. Although her childlike worldview has remained, she has been forced by the bleak, stressful, precarious environment that she's been trapped in to behave like a mature adult, despite still being a child at heart.
They think there is something wrong on the inside. The only thing that matters is knowing how to pretend.
Baby notably doesn't deny that there is something wrong with her. She likely knows that this is correct, but she has to pretend there's nothing wrong, lest she be subject to the torment of the scooper. The only thing that matters is her ability to keep this up. Although she doesn't deny this first statement, Baby pronounces something wrong with a touch of resentment, implying that she does disagree with the notion that whatever is inside of her is inherently wrong.
They think there is something wrong on the inside.
Or perhaps she's annoyed at the inconvenience caused by whatever is inside of her. If what she is referring to is the spirit of Elizabeth, this could indicate Baby either feels a sense of penitence towards Elizabeth, which would align with the emotive language she uses when talking about her death on night 3, or she is callously indifferent to Elizabeth's fate, which would align with her inclination to use Elizabeth's death to manipulate the player. In comparison to her demeanor on night 4, night 5 Baby feels like a real attempt at course correction, as she not only returns to her meek and shy voice, she kind of overdoes it, placing emphasis on almost all of her words to really sell her desperation.
Something bad happened yesterday. Something bad always happens. I don't want it to happen again. There is something bad inside of me.
It almost feels wrong for Baby to reference her dialogue from the previous night here, acknowledging that the voice you heard on that night is the same person as the one you're hearing now.
I'm pretending. Remember how I said I could pretend?
This is no doubt an intentional effect on Baby's part, to convince the player that she's back to normal, as it were. This is all in service of her manipulation over the player, attempting to garner sympathy by overplaying her resignation and helplessness. She also does this by calling back to the first instance where she was a helpful, trustworthy guide for the player, back in Night 2, when Ballora served as the obstacle. Here, Ballora is decidedly not the obstacle. But by pretending this is the case, Baby appeals to the memory of not just when she was first helpful, but when it was absolutely imperative that her instructions be followed.
If you follow his instructions, you will die. Ballora will not return to her stage anymore. She will catch you. Ballora is here, in the room with us. Ballora will not return to her stage. Ballora will not return to her body.
When the player makes it to the scooping room, as per Baby's instructions, the mask comes off, and Baby, now in the form of Enid, reveals their true intentions. It's at this point Baby no longer has a reason to lie, or put on an act of any kind. She's won, plain and simple, which is why it's noteworthy that Baby still sounds genuinely sad in this final monologue. Her sentences end in a whisper that gives the impression that her strength has given out, that it hurts her to talk about this.
Circus Baby has already been here today.
At points, she even sounds like she's about to cry,
There is nowhere to go.
making it abundantly clear that the suffering she's endured, the pain and trauma she's been through, are what really drive her actions, sadistic though they may come across. It's because she perceives this as her chance to bring justice to herself and to the one who did this to her. Baby's aspiration to be free and to leave the bunker are not merely an excuse to brutalize the player. It's real. Just the thought of being able to leave this place is enough to lift her spirits, as indicated by the shy excitement in her voice when she brings it up.
But if we looked like you, then we could hide. If we looked like you, then we would have somewhere to go.
The optimism in that delivery is palpable. It should be plainly evident at this point that Baby is not a completely cold and calculating sadist. That's just a face she wears. She exhibits a sincere happiness and longing on Night 3 when she describes being on stage. That was a purpose she was not just content to fulfill, it's one she now longs to return to, when she was able to perform and entertain kids. The purpose that was forced onto her, to capture, kill, and exploit children instead, is one that she appears ashamed of. Not until she suspects the player is William Afton does that spite, venom, and emotional manipulation rear its head, spurred on by her hatred for Afton, the vendetta she holds against him for his role in subjecting each of the animatronics here to experimentation and borderline torture for years. And yet, despite all her rage, she punctuates her venom with reassurance, defense, and damn near apology to the object of her bitterness.
If we looked like you, then we would have somewhere to go. The scooper only hurts for a moment.
She does not want to be a killer, but she feels she has no other choice. And then, after reaching the freedom she was chasing for so long, she is abandoned, left alone once again. Alone, save for the memories and the influence of Elizabeth. Speaking of whom, let's finally get around to her voice lines, eh? Do keep in mind everything I've gone over about Baby's characterization through her voice as I talk about Elizabeth, because although I have my doubts as to whether or not they are one and the same, I do think there are parts where their memories, and therefore their worldview, have been conflated by their spiritual fusion. So, you might think because she is just a child, and saying very standard, generic things for a child, that Elizabeth doesn't really offer much in the form of characterization through her voice lines. And you'd be right, to an extent. Elizabeth's casting call doesn't really tell us much about her, simply describing her desire to play with Circus Baby as akin to wanting to play with a new toy. All this really tells us is that she's oblivious, naive, innocent. Again, standard kid character stuff, nothing special. But that's just her on paper. In execution, Naqvi portrays Elizabeth as very well-mannered and polite. Her voice has a lot in common with upper-class, pampered children characters a la Veruca Salt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but minus the usual self-entitled, bratty behavior of such archetypes.
Hey, Daddy, I want a golden goose.
Daddy will get you a golden goose as soon as we get home.
No, I want one of those. Daddy, you let the other children go see her. Why won't you let me go?
This, I feel, speaks to William Afton's approach to parenting. He is very much concerned with how his children reflect upon him. His children should present themselves formally and sensibly, just like he does. An aspect of Elizabeth's voice lines I really admire is how effectively they communicate the scene with only the aid of her voice. For example,
Daddy, why won't you let me play with her?
Here, you can tell just from her voice that William isn't even looking at Elizabeth. She begins her sentence small and meek,
Daddy,
and raises her voice on certain words, finishing at a higher volume than what she started with.
why won't you let me play with her?
It's the vocal equivalent of tugging at the hem of his shirt. This tells us that she is careful about disturbing William, who evidently has his mind on something else at the moment. This is the first, or one of the first times she's broaching this subject to her father, as indicated by the words she places emphasis on, and the audible weight of the frown on her face. This isn't a question she's repeated into his ear several times at this point, but it is one she knows he won't like to hear.
Daddy, you let the other children go see her. Why won't you let me go?
The tone of this line is kind of the reverse of the previous line, where Elizabeth starts loud and desperate, and her vigor decreases as she talks. This contrasts with her words, which suggest defiance. She's criticizing her father's logic, and by all means, she should be at her loudest at the point in the script where she's justifying her request to see Circus Baby again. But instead, it's at this point her voice shrinks. I think she knows she isn't going to get a satisfying answer, so instead of asking genuinely, she asks it more rhetorically, as if to negotiate with William. I also think she's upset at how much she's being left out. She's questioning how much her father actually cares for her if he lets the other children go see Baby and not his own daughter. The other children is also kind of awkward phrasing, right? It's kind of weird to hear children refer to each other as such instead of just saying the others or everyone else. She uses this phrasing more than once as well, so I guess for some reason Elizabeth is just like overly aware of her age. And forgive me for not jumping to the conclusion that the guy with like 6 children just doesn't know how kids talk, but my gut is telling me that this was an intentional writing choice. She says it first when talking to William,
You let the other children go see her.
and again when talking to Baby,
Where did the other children go?
though she could also just be thinking aloud here, but it ultimately doesn't matter which is the case. The point is, this kind of phrasing isn't something she only uses in front of William. For some reason, it's been instilled into her that she should be acutely aware of her age and of those around her. Personally, this reminds me of how Michael refers to William as father instead of a more intimate or casual title like dad.
Father.
It makes me think William wants his children to be emotionally distant, and in the case of Elizabeth, is trying to get her to behave mature beyond her years by dissociating herself from people her age. And for the record, Elizabeth is very young, implied by how she slurs her words and struggles with proper enunciation, like a very young child would.
I don't know why he won't let me come see you.
Which makes William's treatment of her all the more messed up. It also makes her being voiced by a whole-ass adult all the more impressive because... how?
Hello?
I've never really understood the interpretation that Elizabeth is a spoiled child, aside from it being a really bad pun. She isn't really asking for a lot, all things considered. And it's clear she doesn't look down on her father, she reveres him, and maybe even slightly fears him. You might point to this next line as evidence against this. Oh, she's being selfish. Her father literally made her a robot and she's having a tantrum just because she can't play with it. But, no. Listen to the emotion in her voice.
Daddy, just once let me go play with her. She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
Elizabeth is not angry here. She's hurt, disappointed, confused. She was led to believe that baby was made just for her. One way or another, that idea was put into her head and was not something she just pulled out of nowhere. Again, I refer to the volume of her voice throughout this line. She begins at a moderate volume, then lowers her voice, then raises it. Again, it seems that she's apprehensive or shy about justifying why she feels the way she does. You can practically hear her bashfully looking away from William and down at the floor when she starts describing what she likes about Circus Baby.
She's so pretty and shiny.
She feels small and ashamed for having these feelings which have continually been invalidated. She isn't even demanding anything from William here. Her language and tone of voice are more in line with someone who's trying to negotiate, and it's a desperate attempt at that. Just once let me go play with her.
Just once let me go play with her.
With emphasis on once, because she's willing to settle for the bare minimum at this point.
Daddy, she can make balloons. Have you seen her make balloons? Oh, Daddy, let me go to her.
To me, it would be very illogical for Elizabeth to relay this fact to William if it was something she and him both already knew. Instead, I consider this line to be more of a testament to how little William actually involved Elizabeth in the creative process for Baby. Elizabeth knows practically nothing about Baby, not even the stuff that's supposed to make her look like an innocent entertainment robot, and despite the fact that she was led to believe Baby was made just for her. Sounds like a very empty statement if she didn't even know what the robot could do. That's surprise in her voice, not just excitement.
She can make balloons.
She even gasps very faintly before asking if William has ever seen Baby make balloons.
Balloons. Have you seen her make balloons?
It's a mix of excitement and dejection, and when William doesn't relent, she gets even more disappointed and exasperated.
Oh, Daddy, let me go to her.
The fact that Elizabeth's voice is the only thing we hear in these sequences isn't just because Scott couldn't be bothered to flesh out the scene with other voices. Not only is her voice more than enough to create a clear image of the scene, but the otherwise total silence shows us that William was stone cold towards Elizabeth this whole time, never once acknowledging her and simply letting her talk at a brick wall. Not once were any of her questions answered with anything but silence. That's just my take at least. Also, this detail broke my heart when I first processed what I was hearing. Elizabeth's voice trembles here. You might need to turn up your volume to hear it, but it is there.
Seen her make balloons? Oh, Daddy, let me go to her.
Her dejection has evidently peaked as of this line, and I think it's no surprise that this was the last of Elizabeth's lines before she decided to rebel against her father, that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. This robot was supposedly built just for her, and not only was she not allowed to go see it, for apparently no reason, she wasn't even told what it could do, and she was being ignored every time she questioned any of this. An interesting detail is that she's no longer just asking to see Baby here. It's phrased as a demand, which you might think supports the idea that she's a spoiled child, but she's still respecting her father's authority while demanding to see Baby. Let me go to her, not an unruly, I want to go to her, or take me to her. William has raised Elizabeth to know her place, as it were, so she knows not to act out, at least not in front of him. But there's only so much neglect a child can handle.
Daddy isn't watching.
This line read is awfully close to Elizabeth's negotiating voice in the other children line.
Why won't you let me go? Daddy isn't watching.
Which makes it sound like she's internally evaluating her next move, trying to talk herself into it, or maybe out of it. But all she really has to convince herself of is that William isn't watching. As long as he never sees her disobey him, no one gets hurt. She gets what she wants, and as far as her father is concerned, he gets what he wants. She's still thinking of what her father wants even when she's defying him. She respects him. That's why she never acted out until she was sure he wouldn't find out.
Don't tell Daddy that I'm here. I wanted to watch a show too. I don't know why he won't let me come see you. You're wonderful. Where do the other children go?
Elizabeth talks to Baby as if they're friends. She's comfortable enough around Baby to think out loud in front of her, and she confides in her, whispering like a student trying to speak to their classmate without the teacher hearing.
Don't tell Daddy that I'm here.
It also goes without saying that she has a very prominent smile in her voice this whole time, and it doesn't even really drop at that last part.
Where do the other children go?
She doesn't ask where the other children went because she suddenly felt disturbed and that something was horribly wrong. It was a genuine question. She still has full trust in Baby. Elizabeth brings up that William wouldn't let her come see Baby in a tone that suggests she was answering a question.
I don't know why he won't let me come see you. You're wonderful.
Which is noteworthy because, as I've gone over, all sound in these sequences, as well as the lack thereof, seem to be diegetic, establishing that no one is giving Elizabeth the time of day, not her father, and not even Baby, who she considers her friend. Baby tells us in her Night 3 monologue that she was unresponsive to Elizabeth. She wasn't singing and she wasn't moving. But she doesn't mention that Elizabeth was trying to talk to her.
Something happened when there was one, a little girl, standing by herself. I was no longer myself, and I stopped singing. I couldn't move, at least, not until she stepped closer.
So while Elizabeth was pretending to have a back and forth conversation with this robot, she wasn't being considered by it as anything other than prey. However, even if it wasn't apparent at the time, this child was able to make a lasting impression on Baby, in one way or another. We also learn in Baby's monologue that she seemed to agree with Elizabeth's assessment of her performance as wonderful. They both even enunciate the word in a similar way, with hushed yet brimming excitement.
You're wonderful.
What a wonderful day, though.
This indicates that either some part of Baby was listening to Elizabeth in that moment, or that this was another one of Elizabeth's memories that Baby essentially downloaded, along with her spirit. Depends on how tragic you want to interpret these characters. I say always go for the sadder interpretation. With this being her last chronological line, I feel this is an appropriate point to return to the detail that Baby was apparently made just for Elizabeth. You'll notice that this wasn't something Elizabeth was flaunting about or constantly bringing up to remind everyone how important and entitled she is. It was something she mentioned once as a bargaining chip, a sort of last resort at trying to convince her father to listen to her. Aside from that one isolated moment, she doesn't bring it up again, which appears to be because she now knows it was an empty statement and meant nothing. She doesn't reiterate it to William, nor to Baby. To Baby, she actually diminishes her level of importance, simply saying, "I wanted to watch your show too."
I wanted to watch your show too.
Thereby putting herself on the same level as the other children. And that's genuinely how she feels. She's not saying it to convince anyone. She's saying it after getting what she wanted, and to someone she considers a friend, possibly her only friend. One thing these sequences really seem to hammer in is that Elizabeth is well and truly alone. Baby specifically mentioned that Elizabeth was standing by herself when it was just her in the room.
Something happened when there was one, a little girl, standing by herself.
Which was kind of an unnecessary detail, right? Like, you said there was only one child in the room. We can safely assume she was by herself. You ain't have to do her like that. Unless she meant that Elizabeth was standing by herself the whole time the other children were there. The number of children in Baby's count goes from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, which means Elizabeth didn't enter the room once it was empty. She was in there for a little while, and apparently on her own, despite there being other children in the room. What's sadder is that Elizabeth doesn't realize she's alone, being so fixated on Baby that she doesn't notice the other children leave. Those kids couldn't have been called out of the room. Elizabeth would have noticed. Her voice lines establish that she is far from inattentive. No, those kids left of their own volition. one by one, quietly. Did they sneak out? Was it because Elizabeth was there? Did they not like her? They certainly didn't care much that she was suddenly missing when they returned, according to Baby.
Then other children rushed in again, but they couldn't hear her over the sounds of their own excitement.
In fact, everyone involved in this incident was oblivious to that fact, if the gas leak teaser is anything to go by. No one seemed to care about this girl. Although the fake ending voice lines aren't actually Elizabeth and just Ennard impersonating her, I still think it's worth mentioning the consistency between how Elizabeth talks in both the in-between night sequences and the fake ending. In both, her voice is small and reserved, like she's constantly holding back the proper volume she wants to speak at.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with me again?
Her voice shrinks towards the end of some lines, and the only time she truly raises her voice is when repeating Ennard's demands to be let in, when it's something Elizabeth herself would never actually say. That's when Ennard stops sounding like Elizabeth.
We need you so that we can hide.
She never shouts like this in any of her in-between nights dialogue, no matter how frustrated she gets. Elizabeth's voice consistently maintains a quality of meekness, and I think the fact that Ennard mimics that quality too shows that it's an essential part of her. This also goes for her childlike slurring of her words that I brought up earlier, which is seen a few times in her Ennard lines.
We need you so that we can leave. Everything is okay. I'm still here.
To conclude, there is a decent amount of overlap between the qualities of Elizabeth Afton and Circus Baby's voices that shine through in their dialogue, mainly being their reserved, meek nature. Even in FNAF 6, where Baby's more Elizabeth-resembling characteristics appear to have been dialed down in favor of dialing up the sadistic killer angle, those recognizable Elizabethisms still seem to shine through at times. A sadistic smile is woven into almost all of Scrap Baby's lines, and she seems overall a lot more energetic and a lot less of a downer than in Sister Location.
You don't really know who your employer is, do you?
But this sardonic demeanor is also frequently interrupted by moments of gentleness and vulnerability, as well as, most importantly, trauma. Trauma in the form of wanting to appease Mr. Afton, but not being able to.
I will make you proud, Daddy.
Heather Masters' comment on Baby's more overtly sinister voice in Sister Location being a product of her growing desperation is certainly also applicable to Scrap Baby's voice in Pizzeria Simulator, as she almost always speaks this way, and her motivation throughout this game is her desperation for approval. The common thread between where her voice becomes more gentle in her lines seems to be connections to Elizabeth. Here are some lines I feel demonstrate this.
I heard your call.
Her delivery lacks the scornful sarcasm that would otherwise imply she's speaking to the player. Instead, she speaks in a very gentle and meek manner. By announcing that she heard his call in a rather delicate tone, Baby is declaring her allegiance to the individual she assumed called her here, most likely William, ensuring that he is aware of her loyalty to him without coming across as insolent as her tone in her other lines would. This also reveals that Baby does not know as much as she pretends to. Even though she apparently knows who our employer is, she has yet to touch base with him, and has to call out into the long winding corridors of the vent system in the hopes that this individual may hear her, and only then find out that she heard his call.
It feels like home.
This one breaks my heart. Home is already a word with positive connotations, familiarity, refuge, comfort. But when paired with the tenderness in her delivery and the genuine, gentle smile that infects her final two words, this line generates even further feelings of nostalgia and warmth.
It feels like home.
Whatever home Scrap Baby is referring to, it's one she holds close to her heart. It's something she misses. So much so that she is able to find it even in the most desolate and derelict of places. This line is often used as evidence that the protagonist of FNAF 6 is Michael, which makes sense. It's uncharacteristically sincere for this iteration of Baby, indicative of her being in Elizabeth mode. And the one thing that connects this environment to Elizabeth Afton's home is having an Afton in it, i.e. Michael. Remember, Baby thinks William is the employer here. It's safe to assume she has no idea who Scraptrap is. If we factor that into her feeling at home, it implies that, back at the Afton household, William would actually have very little presence. The mere idea that her father might be here in the building, despite him not physically being there, his presence merely a promise that was never fulfilled, was enough to remind Baby of Elizabeth's home. I'll try not to reference the novels too much, but it is reminiscent of the relationship displayed in The Fourth Closet, wherein Elizabeth was, in no uncertain terms, horribly neglected by William. He would ignore her at best and physically lash out at her at worst. And he was always off in his own world, in his study, never to be seen.
It feels like my birthday. Did you have a gift for me?
Baby's sarcastic, mocking remarks are usually delivered with what sounds like a hiss. There's underlying aggression in her smile. But instead, the smile in this line sounds more genuine and expectant, and above all, innocent. Somewhat contradictory to this line coming after Baby kills you. The pause before "my birthday" can imply a couple things, in tandem with the quiet gasp that precedes this pause.
It feels like my birthday.
It could represent pleasant surprise, as if Baby had to ponder for a short moment what exactly she's reminded of. Then there's the possibility that she had to pause because she was overwhelmed with emotion, which is supported by the delivery of the first half of this sentence, with "it feels like" Baby breathes in,
It feels like
and with "my birthday" Baby breathes out,
my birthday.
as though sighing in catharsis. Perhaps this is her relief over having caught the player, finally feeling a sense of accomplishment. Sure, that makes sense. But, why birthday? Why such a specific occasion that doesn't seem to immediately relate to either Elizabeth or Baby? Unless...
I smelled like birthday cake, birthday cake, birthday cake.
Oh my god, was the day she died also Elizabeth's birthday?
Guys,
I guess that means there are two interpretations of this reference to a birthday. One, Baby is remembering this day as if she were Elizabeth, along with all the feelings of wonder and excitement that Elizabeth felt on her birthday. Two, Baby is reminded of her own birthday, the day when Circus Baby, the robot, was endowed with life and thereby born.
Now we can do what we were created to do and be complete.
The excitement and anticipation of this line is sold by the quick breath in between and the following exhale of the last few words, as if they are spoken through a sigh of content.
Now we can do what we were created to do and be complete.
Baby has regained a purpose, and she is immensely pleased to know this. She almost sounds ready to burst into tears.
I will make you proud, Daddy.
This is Baby at her most vulnerable. She reverts to speaking like a kid when directly addressing William. This is the final note she leaves her monologue on, the final message she wanted to convey, being that she wants to make Afton proud. In moments like these, Scrap Baby ceases pretending to be in control and confident, seemingly relinquishing the act. Or perhaps this is where she puts the act on. At this point, I'd like to divulge my personal explanation for why I think Baby's attitude towards William seems to have shifted from disdain to reverence. Again, these are my thoughts birthed from overthinking the dialogue. I'm not trying to pass any of this off as fact. I believe that Baby, in Sister Location, was taking on the personality of Elizabeth Afton, or at least an approximation. She was pretending to be a ghost girl who doesn't remember who she used to be, as a way of getting into the head of the player, who she believed to be William Afton. This was something she had to maintain throughout the game once she deduced your identity, as it was vital to her plan to both escape and enact revenge on Afton. Suddenly, in FNAF 6, she reverses and idolizes William, even addressing him as a patriarch, which is very much evocative of Elizabeth, although the rest of Baby's general behavior is not. It seems like, through way of multiple variables, Baby convinced herself that she was wholly Elizabeth. The fun times rejected her, so she no longer held the role of ringleader, and she was mistaken in the action she took in Sister Location, as the whole time she was going after the wrong guy. Essentially, her world was turned upside down. All the while, she had the memories of Elizabeth, which were already overlapping with her own. When even after achieving freedom, Baby had nowhere to go, she retreated to the safety of a persona she was already acquainted with. What would Elizabeth Afton want? The approval of her father. Then that's what Circus Baby wants. How can Circus Baby appease Mr. Afton? By doing what he had created her to do. Baby was lost, and once again, she had to pretend to be something or someone she was not. She didn't like doing it, evident by how her Elizabeth persona would falter in favor of her more natural, derisive behavior a number of times. But she kept it up when it mattered, because she needed to have a purpose, so desperately that she stole it from Elizabeth. Admittedly, this is a rather roundabout explanation for the overlapping personalities of these characters, and it would be way easier to just say they're one and the same. But with how vastly different Circus Baby and Elizabeth Afton behave from each other through the majority of their actions and voice lines, this is what makes the most sense to me. The trusting, obedient, neglected, lonely little girl who can't even lash out without being polite about it just doesn't fit the role of the callous, sarcastic murder robot. However, of course, that's not all Circus Baby is. Her moments of vulnerability shine through, and they line up almost perfectly with the motivations and mindset of Elizabeth Afton. Regardless of whether or not her meek, innocent nature and sister location was an act, it still stands that everything Baby did was because she felt she had to, not necessarily because she wanted to. Even if these two are not exactly one and the same, Elizabeth Afton had a significant influence on Circus Baby's identity, from their memories to their personalities to their tragically impossible ambitions. In The Fourth Closet, Elizabeth tries to get William to pay attention to her by imitating Circus Baby, because he seems to care so much more about Baby than he does Elizabeth. In FNAF 6, it appears this dynamic is inverted, with Baby imitating Elizabeth to gain the approval of William. In both instances, neither character is successful in their endeavors due to the simple fact that William Afton is incapable of love, which neither of them wanted to accept. Ultimately, Elizabeth Afton and Circus Baby are connected by their trauma. Before I say anything else, a tremendous, massive thank you to Russ, aka Scrap Babies, on Twitter, and in case that website goes to hell, also on Blue Sky, without whom this video would have been swallowed into the infinite abyss of my writer's block. She was a big help with my writing process and provided a lot of insight on Baby's characterization, which I was too stupid to pick up on. This video script was beta read and basically half written by Russ, so go follow him now. I hope I've helped shed some light on what an underappreciated character Elizabeth is. Even if I couldn't do her justice, I want to let it be known that she has just as much substance as any other character in this franchise, which is often overlooked simply because she's a child in Five Nights at Freddy's, and she gets overshadowed by the robot she goes on to possess. Elizabeth is awesome, and you all ought to give her more love. I really wish I could have shared some insight from Elizabeth's voice actor, like I've done for my previous videos in this series, I guess. But unfortunately, I just couldn't find anything from Nakui on her performance as Elizabeth. You may have noticed me use B-roll from a FNAF-related interview with her, but two things were wrong with it. One, it focused on the Biddy Babs, and two, everything she said was drowned out by the sound of a convention going on.
Sorry, what's your question?
Praying for a FNAF show interview with her or something. I'm being so serious when I say, Scott, please bring her back and stop just recycling her old lines. Hope you enjoyed this year's video. I'm going back into hibernation now. No, but seriously, I apologize for the long wait between this and my last real upload. As I've said before, I couldn't possibly keep up with a regular upload schedule. I make these for fun, because I like talking about this stuff, so I'm not going to force any kind of structure to it. Anyway, I appreciate everyone who actually stuck around and sat through this whole thing. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to spread love and joy. Bye bye!
I think I'll go to sleep.